In this picture, we have one of the most tactically revolutionary managers, if not the most tactically revolutionary manager of our generation, and we also have Pep Guardiola next to him. Obviously, I'm kidding. He is a disciple of Pep Guardiola, Enzo Maresca, and he has now joined Chelsea. So in today's video, we're going to take a little deep dive into his Leicester side before considering how he may set up at Chelsea and who it may benefit most. Flashing up on your screen now is how Maresca's Leicester set up, their average positions, and then how they set up from the start, essentially, and then how they transitioned in possession. We'll cover all of these in more detail as we get to them sections of the video, but firstly, let's get into the philosophy and principles of Enzo Maresca. Enzo Maresca is very insistent on how he wants his teams to play football. He wants to play a slow and intricate style to dominate the ball. They focus on many touches and deep build-up patterns, controlling the game whilst an emphasis of playing in traffic to entice opponents and bait opponents to press them so they can then play through them and create these artificial counter-attacks or artificial attacks that look like transitions. Maresca wants his players to be well drilled with high footballing IQ so they know when to occupy the right spaces on the pitch, when to take the ball and when to progress through the lines with more pace. Also, when to cover each other when pressing aggressively, which leads on to the last point. They play a high man-to-man press. They counter-press via the inverted fullbacks. And they want to regain possession as soon as possible to then control and dominate the game, as we first said. Let's touch on a few of the build-up patterns that you see from Maresca's Leicester. Here is the first one where the goalkeeper steps up and sort of forms that back four. So you have the goalkeeper, one of the centre-backs, and then the other, one of the full-backs is holding their nominal full-back position, and the other centre-back has pushed out as another full-back. You then have the two pivot, very narrow in the middle of the pitch, creating this 4-2 shape, as you can see again here. The pivot is conformed of the right-back for Leicester, Pereira, inverting in to the midfield alongside Harry Winks, creating that narrow midfield 2 pivot in front of the 4-back. This then progresses into the usual shape of the 3-2. So you've got the 3 central defenders, one of which is a fullback, but is playing off the left and becoming the left centre-back for Leicester. And you then have the 2 midfielders. So in this image, it's actually Hamza Chowdhury, who was inverting from right-back into the midfield alongside Harry Winks. So now that we spoke about that base in the build-up, it is important to mention the number 8s and their usage within Enzo Maresca's system. So as you can see here, when that 3-2 base is a bit more compact, those 2 8s have a little bit more license to roam between the lines and pick up the ball. So as you can see, Shrewsbury Hall, which is that left red circle, he's actually dropping in to a wider area because there is a gap there for him to receive the ball between the wide centre-back and the winger who's providing a lot of width and height up the pitch, which we'll speak about later. You can see this again here. It's a bit more of a narrow 3-2 base, and Shrewsbury Hall is going to use this space to drop in, and he can then receive the ball as an out ball to get the team out, or he dragged a player away with him, which means Ndidi, the other right circle, can then move over more centrally to receive the ball between the lines. So these two are always looking to be the out ball from that 3-2 base who are circulating the ball in their own half, and then they are looking to be the outlet, the first line breaking pass. It's important to note just how narrow the pivot is and how close together they are. And that is, again, to draw players towards them and to almost compact that area of the pitch so that those 8s have a little bit more room to receive the ball in those wider areas or even in central zones, but a bit more advanced between the lines. However, this is one image that I love because you can see that when one of the wider centre-backs pushes out to provide that width, and they're providing that area where Shrewsbury Hall was dropping into earlier, Shrewsbury Hall, you can see with the arrow at the top of your screen, he then makes the run away from play because that area of the pitch has already been occupied. They've managed to get into that area of the pitch with their possession and sustain possession in that area. So Shrewsbury Hall can now make a line-breaking run to either receive between the lines or attack the box if the ball goes out wide. Another staple for Enzo Maresca is his willingness to play in traffic, and he says that himself. He wants to create these tight moments of excellence from his players, his technician players, in crowded areas of the pitch, forcing opposition players to bait them and bait the press and to press them in so that when they do come, they can play out through this traffic because they're good enough to do so, which can then lead to attacks which create these artificial transitions, which they look like transitions, they look like counter-attacks because you've drawn the players towards you. This is something that De Zerbi does and a lot of those high-class coaches that want to bait the press. Let's take a look at the main attacking patterns for Enzo Maresca. And mainly what we're going to mention is the width and the height that the wingers have to play at. Their job is to pin the opposition defenders. They are the highest members of this team. They are pinning in the fullbacks so they can't move too far forward. And again, that gives space to the middle ground players, so your midfielders and even the striker and the eights to drop into, whilst the wingers keep the height and the width of the team. Another trend is this pentagon made in the middle of the pitch by the two pivots, the number 8 and the striker dropping in. Again, with the striker dropping in here to create this pentagon, the idea is for them to circulate the ball as a 5 and make quick, short combinations through the lines to then find these high wingers who, again, as I said earlier, are providing the height and the width for the team. So then they can make their runs in behind or stay out wide to receive the ball after these little combinations in the middle of the pitch, creating these 1v1 isolations for the wingers, who are then their main goal is to attack the box or attack the fullback and make something happen. Here are a few more images that show just how wide those wingers are set to stay. They are providing that width and they are going to get in behind when they can to get on the ball. Another feature is these half-space crosses. So that is important that the 8s can then attack the box. So this is quite an important feature because when you're crossing from these half spaces, you don't just want the centre forward in the box. Those 8s have got to make those runs as well. And as I said with the wingers, these 1v1 isolations are very important. As you can see here, Mavididi collecting the ball out wide on the left. There has been an overload on the other side of the pitch. So the overload to isolate idea, where you overload one side of the pitch, and then when the switch comes over, that winger has lots of space to either cut inside and attack the box or to attack the byline and put a ball into the box. And lastly, to speak on their defensive structure, you sort of see this 4-1-4-1 shape, or sometimes what a 4-5-1. So the striker being the main part of the press, and then the 4 in the middle with winks behind. What you often see is the players going aggressive. They need to be aggressive when they do end up triggering the press. Often what you'll see with Leicester is they will sit off for a little bit, but once their one triggers the press, so it might be Vardy or it might be Ndidi, once that press is triggered, everybody across the pitch goes aggressively man for man, including the defenders. I've seen videos where Vestergaard follows his man all the way into the middle of the pitch where the number 6 would be for the opposition. The idea is that once that press is triggered, everybody has got their man, they're in a 1-for-1 duel, and they are going aggressive to win that ball back. Another important thing to mention with their defensive structure is this year for Leicester, Fatowu, who was often playing on that right wing, would have a little bit more defensive responsibility than the Leicester left winger, Mavididi, mainly because the right back was the one inverting. So Fatowu would drop in, allow Ricardo to still invert even out of possession at times to squeeze that central area of the pitch, meaning Fatowu would drop in to cover that late run from the opposition fullback. So that winger has quite a lot of responsibility to fill in and even at times make a 5-4-1 out of possession. But enough about Leicester, let's get into how Maresca fits at Chelsea. I will speak about a few different options that I think we could see because there's a lot of players that could suit a lot of different roles. I'll also mention a few different players that I think will do well, but I'm also going to save another video to speak about winners and losers of this deal in terms of some players that will really excel and some players that I'm not 100% sure about. But let's get into how it looks on paper. Now, it's important to note that this is if Maresca's framework and tactics are basically copy-pasted into Chelsea. There's nothing to say that he won't make changes for certain personnel to get into their absolute favourable positions. That being said, the main head boggler for me is Enzo and Caicedo, because I think they're both going to suit this role, or these roles, so well, but people wouldn't necessarily think that it would be Enzo deeper than Caicedo. But I think Enzo will be deeper than Caicedo for Maresca, mainly for that ball-playing ability and that 100-touch man that we saw with Harry Winks for him last season. I do also believe Caicedo has that in him to play that box-to-box role. He's very good. He can carry the ball in those spaces and in those gaps to attack. He is good enough to receive on the half-turn. He is defensively good enough that he can start the press. He can trigger the press like Ndidi did, and he can keep Chelsea sustaining attacks in the opposition half. This is something we actually saw with Rice at the end of the season, playing as the number 8 for Arsenal as well. People's drawback with having Enzo as the 6 would be the defensive structure, but that's the point of having the inverted right back who comes in there to provide that defensive cover, as Maresca even says it. That right back inverting isn't just for in-possession purposes. They're in there to provide that little bit of protection off the ball. And who better than Reece James, who can do pretty much all of these roles, and I think Gusto could do this perfectly as well. As you can see here, it's important to mention that Caicedo could easily do this role. He wants this player in the number 6 to be technically astute so they can bait the press, and Caicedo is more than good enough to do this. It's not just Enzo that can, it's just that Enzo gets the absolute best out of that role, in my opinion. By having Caicedo in that deeper role, you'd still get that ball circulation from his part, and Enzo would have to be more of the roaming 8. My only drawback with this is Enzo would still have that box-to-box mindset where he has to get up and down the pitch, which is something I do still think he can do. But I think people want him a little bit deeper to influence the game in higher volumes of touches, essentially. Another possibility would be Nkunku in one of those 8 positions where he can go box to box, he can attack the box and he's in central zones. This would mean Palmer would probably play out on the right, and again, this is something he can do. He's more than enough got the quality to do this, and he'd probably have his output best showing from that right-hand side in terms of goals. But the thing to take into account is the right winger has to stay high and wide. They're pinning the fullbacks. I don't think you want Palmer that far away from general play because I think he's too good to keep away from that side of the game. I also think people have to be careful with their expectations of Palmer this season. He has had a ridiculously good season with goals and assists, but this season don't be surprised if his goals go down, but I could actually see his assists going up, especially if he is playing that number 8 Dewsbury Hall role, because he will be attacking the box, he'll be in and around the box, but he'll also be in creative areas where he can drop off, pick the ball up and put those half-space crosses into the box. And it will depend on who's attacking them, of course. But I think his assist numbers could go through the roof this year. But his goals may drop, but not to our deficit. It won't hurt the team. On screen now is a few other options. So here you got Cucurella inverted into midfield and Carney, who I think will be a brilliant 8 for Enzo Maresca. I think if he stays fit, he has a massive part to play in this team because he is such a perfect Enzo Maresca 8 profile. But after deliberation, this is the team that I have came to. So I'm going to talk you through this team. And, of course, keeping in mind there's players not in because there's players that, again, they're on the bench or they would be behind a certain player. There's so many different combinations you can see with his teams and so many players that aren't even in this squad are going to be important, which, again, I will mention in another video when I'm talking more about the personnel rather than the actual framework of the team. So I've also come to the conclusion that Palmer and Caicedo probably in this area would swap. You'd probably have Palmer on that right 8 role, whereas Caicedo would be that more defensive 8, but it would actually be on the left because Palmer from the right-hand side, he then has the ability to put those over-the-top crosses in on his left foot, and he can also cut in on his left foot, whereas from the left, you're not getting as much of those angles for him on his stronger left foot. So I think you'd probably see him as the left 8, which is something I've corrected there. Now let's talk about why I think a few of the playing personnel really suit this team. And we're going to start with Colwill as that central centre-back in possession. Something we spoke about earlier is when that goalkeeper steps up to be part of that back 4 in possession to play out from that 4-2 base with the pivot being very narrow. The idea of the pivot playing as this narrow wall is to give Colwill and even the goalkeeper a chance to split the lines and play into that number 8 on the ground. So what I want is Colwill in the middle of the pitch because I think his skill set on the ball and his ability to play with pauser that we speak about where he's willing to put his foot on the ball, wait for the last moment to open up an angle. He's the best player at doing that, especially because he played that way under De Zerbi at Brighton. So he's best suited to that role. And I think you'll get the absolute maximum amount of Colwill playing in that area on the pitch in possession. You've then got the moments when the 3-2 base is more compact, again, as we spoke about earlier, where the 8s can then drop into those pockets to pick up the ball. Palmer, again, I think will be brilliant at doing this. So imagine this is on the other side if he was playing as that right 8 instead of that left 8. But he's dropping into that pocket to pick up the ball and he can create from this area. This is where somebody like James could then push even further forward, or even Enzo can stray a little bit and players can start to move about. But the idea is those 8 pick up the ball in that pocket as an out ball, and that's how you've beaten the press, and then you can form your second phase of build-up or even go straight into that attacking phase in the final third. The other dynamic I quickly wanted to touch on is the fact that Caicedo and James, if they played like this, so if Palmer was playing as the left 8, I could see a world in which Caicedo plays as the 6 and the right back, which is James, actually inverts more as an attacking 8/10 to have his ability on the ball, his shoot, like his direct nature in terms of his ball striking is superb. So he'd be brilliant to have in those central areas of the pitch. And James can create from those areas extremely well. So I think don't be surprised if we see James from that right back inverting almost like Porro does at times for Tottenham, where that right back is almost becoming an 8/10. And Gusto, again, would be brilliant at this too. Now, as I said, I'm going to quickly touch on the transfers that I think there'll be, but I'm leaving this for another video. I'm going to make a whole video about this with transfer targets and players I think we need to target that will help with these areas of the pitch. But I think key things that we need for Maresca is a goalkeeper that's going to be comfortable on the ball to come and form that 4-2 in build-up, who can recycle the ball. That's a must. Another left-back option, because I don't think Chilwell fits into this style of play at all. I think Cucurella will be very liked by Maresca, but I think another option that can invert and also play as a left centre-back is very important for that left-back role. So I wouldn't be surprised if Chilwell is either moved on or at least phased out, in the sense that he's more of a backroom leader than a player, and he gets different minutes in different areas of the pitch at times because of his leadership. But I think tactically we're going to be looking for at least one more left-back option. Another area that's extremely obvious is the centre-back, especially if Chalobah is sold and Silva has already left, of course. So another centre-back is a must. You want a physically dominant and imposing centre-back who can cover those transitions really well if the ball does break. A lot of the times last season where Leicester did concede, it was on the counter-attack. This often happens with this elitist style of football. You're keeping more of the ball. You're moving up the pitch as a team. If the ball does break, you are susceptible to a counter-attack. Even City get this, and Arsenal, this is how this style of football plays out. So you want your defenders to be able to recover the ball. City have Walker and Gvardiol. Arsenal have Saliba and even Rice, who makes those recovery runs. So you want your right centre-back, if we're going to sign one, if not Wesley Fofana when he's fit, but you want the other centre-backs to have these traits as well. And lastly, whilst I love Jackson, and I also think Nkunku's going to be a very big striker option. So again, I didn't really touch on Nkunku, but again, in the player video, I'll speak about him more because I think he can play multiple roles in this system. But I think the one thing you do need to go out and grab is a box-dominant striker to add something different to this squad. Especially when you're coming up against those low blocks, you want somebody you can aim at in the box. You can up the crossing volume. You can start to get the ball dropping in and around the box, even for those number 8s to play off of that striker. So I think a big box-dominant striker who's good in the air and is strong on the ball in the box is very important, just to add something different to this squad, even if it is from the bench. So, what do you think of Enzo Maresca? I want everybody in the comments to let me know their best starting 11 and what they want to see. Because in the next video, I'm going to speak about how each player fits each role. Because I think people like Enzo, Colwill, Reece James, Gusto, and then I'm even going to go as far as to say Palmer as the number 8. I think they're going to thrive in these new positions, or these positions they're put into. So let me know your lineups. Let me know what you think of the hiring of Enzo Maresca. And then keep an eye out for the next few videos, which will be talking about transfer targets that are needed for Maresca's Chelsea, and talking about how each player suits their role in this new Maresca system.